what are some of the mistakes you have to avoid when you're considering to sell your property to a cash buyer? That's what I'm going to cover in this video. Mistake number one is that you're going to be asking for retail value for your property. But bottom line is Zillow says that your house is worth $350 and you're thinking, I'm going to sell it to a cash buyer and I'm going to ask those guys for $375,000. That's not going to fly. I mean, if you were to put it on the open market with an agent, it still wouldn't fly. And we're not going to live at the property. We actually are thinking that we would buy your property, take money out of our bank account, fix it up, do a bunch of work, and maybe make some money with it. But if you're asking more than retail value, that's really not going to cut it. And so that's mistake number one, is you're thinking, I'm going to ask full retail value for my property and get it with a cash buyer. No, you can get full retail value if you list it with an agent and you go through that process. But when you're dealing with a cash buyer, you're trading. You're trading getting as much as you can for something else, meaning convenience and speed and everything else. And so I covered that in one of my other videos, so I'm not going to cover that in detail here. You can watch one of those other videos. Number two is a mistake that you make is not really understanding what your move out strategy is. And I covered this in other videos, in that up front, you got to know that typically you're expected to be out on the day of closing. And if you're not able to, it could be that you need the money from the transaction in order to move to your next location. It could be that you have too many things in the property and you need some time in order to get the funds and then move everything out. You need to cover that up front as early on in the conversation as possible. Put it out there, and so that way it could be pre-negotiated and you know in writing that that is exactly what you're agreeing to, and there's not going to be any surprises for either for you or for the real estate investor. Because if you're wanting to stay at the property for 2 weeks after the fact, but yet I'm expecting to close and take possession the day of closing because I have all these construction crews coming, and then you tell me at the last minute that, oh, I need 2 weeks. Now I've got other problems because I've got to move people around and other humans where they were expecting to be at your house. Now I got to move them around, and so it becomes problematic. So you want to make sure that you have your move out strategy in mind and that you cover that with your with a cash buyer early on in the conversation. Number three is a mistake that you can make when selling to a cash buyer is trying to do work on the property before you have that conversation with them. Because here's the thing, you say I'm going to sell it to a cash buyer, but before I get those cash buyers to come, I'm going to see if I could spruce up the place. Let me paint this and do that. And I go in, and you telling me that you spent $2,000 on this amazing paint job, but then I'm like, I'm going to tear these walls down because I have another vision for the house. I'm going to tear that wall down. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that, and then all of the work you did is in vain because it has no value for me. So you spending any money at all is completely a mistake. You need to speak with the cash buyers first. And then only then, if you decide to list it with an agent, and because you want to go that route, then at that point, then you might consider what work you might do to the property in order to get it ready. But certainly don't do any of that until, while you're entertaining the idea of selling to a cash buyer. The final mistake you can make when considering to sell to a cash buyer is listing the property with a real estate agent. It's one or the other. What happens is that if you sign with a real estate agent and then later on you decide, oh, I'm going to sell to a cash buyer, one of the things we do is we help you avoid the real estate agent fees. But guess what? You signed a listing agreement, and that realtor ain't going to let you out of that listing agreement, which means that then now you're going to end up paying that commission. So you're going to end up losing money because you listed it with an agent before you spoke with a cash buyer. And then typically some cash buyers like us, we don't buy listed properties. We don't buy listed properties because typically they're asking typically they're at market value, which you have to be in the mindset of, I'm gonna have to give these guys a little bit of a discount in order to take my property. But also too, then now the seller's forced to pay the commission, which means that then we're going to end up paying more, because if you got to pay 10 grand out of pocket for commissions, that's $10,000 that you have coming out of your pocket, which, if we could save that money, then we both win. And that's what the situation is. So those are the mistakes you want to avoid when you're selling your property to a cash buyer, because otherwise it'll make the process more difficult if you don't avoid these mistakes.